In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Jesus, I trust in you. Thy will be done. Our Lady of the Annunciation, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Servant of God, Luisa Piccarreta, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value went and sold all that he had and bought it. Now, we know what that pearl of great price is, that treasure hidden in the field. It is none other than the gift of living in the divine will. So why is that? Well, the treasure is the kingdom, but the gift of living in the divine will is the same exact life that they live in heaven, even while still here on earth. So we don't have to be confused anymore about questions like, what am I calling? How should I respond to the signs of the times? What's heaven really trying to say to the church? What does God really want of us? This is it. This is it. So, here's a clincher. We couldn't possibly risk spending too much to buy the pearl of great price. No sacrifice is too great for the greatest gift. So like this wise merchant, we too should sell everything we possess and purchase it. There's worldly advice that says don't put all your eggs in one basket, and sometimes that's good advice. We need to ignore that advice for this. We need to put all of our eggs in this one basket. Because this basket is God. And God doesn't disappoint. He's never outdone generosity. So, now that you all know how important this is, just get out your checkbooks, and all you need to do is make 3 easy payments of $99.99. Join my Divine Will Secrets Club. Of course, I'm kidding. Thank you. Much to the chagrin of those who would exploit God's grace, it's simple, and it's easy, and free. So the best thing I can do is just share with you a few things that have especially struck me from Luisa's writings, because Luisa is your teacher. No one else alive today. Or specifically, Jesus is your teacher of the divine will through his words to Luisa. So you'll have to forgive me. I got very excited writing this talk, and I wrote it twice as long as it's allowed to be. So last night I was going through my talk, crossing off half of it, so I have to do a bit of skipping around here. So I want to talk about the desire for the gift of living in the divine will, as well as for the desire for his universal reign on earth. I want to talk briefly about love and purity, and everything in our lives, courage and trust, detachment and emptiness, devouring knowledge for the gift of living in the divine will, devotion to Our Lady, and doing acts in the divine will. All, of course, with foundation from Luisa's writings in the Book of Heaven. So first of all, desire. We need to fuel our desire for the gift and for its universal reign into a raging fire. But how do we do that? How do we modify our desires? Because one would think, perhaps, that we're just stuck with whatever desires we have. And a lot of people do live their lives that way. Just whatever they at first feel inclined towards, they just go for that, and they defend it to the end. But that's not the way of a Christian. The way of a Christian is to exercise the will, to modify our desires, to line up with what we know is good, true, and beautiful. So how do we do that? How do we exercise the will to do that? Well, Jesus says to Luisa that every good has its beginning in the memory. So we remind ourselves, we continually remind ourselves of the goodness, truth, and beauty of the rightful object of our desire. So let's talk for a little bit about the goodness, truth, and beauty of this gift of living in the divine will. And some of the things I'm going to say, you might wonder if I'm risking exploiting our desire for certain things, but Jesus does that fairly often. He entices us, he bribes us a bit with holy bribes. He does that a lot to Luisa in the Book of Heaven. So if Jesus is going to say it, I don't think we should overlook it. So I'm going to talk about some things that Jesus has said to Luisa about living in the divine will and his universal reign. It contains everything we could legitimately want. Salvation is contained within it. One who lives in the divine will cannot be lost. Salvation is contained within it. Sanctification is contained within it. One who lives in the divine will can't even. Jesus said that if that were to happen, if one living in the divine will were to go to purgatory, the entire universe would rebel. But it's not going to happen. He says, the first thing my will does is to remove purgatory beforehand. So if the creature were to die after one decided and wanted act of living in my volition, she would take flight towards heaven. Now, not only that, but when one arrives in heaven, even after one decided and wanted act, he or she joins the royal cortege of Our Lady. And Jesus tells Luisa that that royal cortege of Our Lady has been empty since, before maybe the death of St. Hannibal, who may have been the first to die in the divine will. It was just Our Lady alone in that great sphere she occupied. Now, we never become as great as she, but with the divine will, we enter that same sphere as she to form a royal cortege. So, salvation, sanctification, and the highest level of glory in heaven. So, we're all set after this life with the gift. What about during? Jesus talks all the time about coming chastisements to Luisa. We've seen some of them, we haven't seen the half of it yet. So much worse ones are coming, and soon. But what about the children of the divine will during that? Well, here's what Jesus says to Luisa about Mary. The sovereign queen descended from heaven with an indescribable majesty and a tenderness all maternal. This is Luisa saying what Jesus showed her about Mary. And she went around in the midst of creatures in all the nations, and she marked her dear children, those who must not be touched by the scourges. Each one my celestial mother touched, the scourges had no power to touch those creatures. And by scourges, she means chastisements. This is what Jesus often refers to. So the chastisements can't touch you. Okay. What else? We've all got a lot of crosses in this life, despite the fact that the chastisements haven't really full-blown started yet. Even crosses, it's still Christianity, it's still the way of the cross, but even these crosses become sweetness, the one who lives in the divine will. Jesus says that they can't enter your center. For one, this is what he says to Luisa, for one who lives in my will, pain cannot enter her soul. Pain remains outside of the soul, that is, in the human nature. The soul feels them, sees them, touches them, but they do not enter her center. And I think we all know what that means, pain entering the very center of someone, because I think, sadly, we've all seen it. We've seen some people so mired in despair and misery, you can see that pain has become almost identifiable with their nature. But Jesus says that's impossible for one who lives in the divine will. So we could go on for many hours talking about the greatness of living in the divine will, but I think sometimes to foster our desire for it, we should think about the divine will reigning on earth universally. Because even when we receive the gift now, we're still stuck in this world that's, quite honestly, usually the very opposite of the divine will today. So let's talk about the universal reign. What's the greatest thing about the universal reign? I would say the fact that it's guaranteed. Our Lord has decreed it, everything else is nothing. I don't care how many people call it heresy, I don't care how many people fight against it, no force in heaven, earth, or hell can stop it. It's coming, it's going to happen. Real quick, it's not a heresy, it's not millenarianism. Millenarianism is the heresy where Jesus reigns visibly in the flesh before the end of time. That's not the era of peace. That's not the reign of the divine will. It's not an end of the church. It's a full triumph of the church. So, why am I so confident? Why am I so blindly confident in the fact that this is going to happen? Well, because it's not blind confidence, actually. There's many reasons. One of them is that everything Jesus said to Luisa about what was supposed has happened already. I don't have time to go through many of them. I'll just really quickly point out that on April 17th, 1906, Luisa was shown great chastisements, but specifically earthquakes in 3 cities. The very next day, the great San Francisco earthquake happened. 4 months later, the 1906 Valparaiso earthquake in Chile occurred and killed even more people. 2 years later, the great 1908 Messina earthquake occurred, which was the greatest earthquake in the history of Europe. To this very day, it remains that. Jesus showed Luisa that earthquake also the morning before it happened. She was clearly told that World War I was coming. She was clearly told during and after World War I that a worse one was about to come, involving even more nations and more death. Of course it did. So the bottom line is this. If Jesus promises Luisa that something's coming, it's coming. History has already proven that. And when more people start realizing this from Luisa's writings, this is going to blow away everybody, that she is so spot on predicted everything, or that Jesus has through her. So we can be very confident when we read Jesus' words responding to Luisa. Luisa asked Jesus one day, how will this kingdom of the divine will ever be able to come? Sin abounds and evil gets worse. Jesus responds to that saying, my daughter, everything is possible for us. The impossibilities, difficulties, the insurmountable obstacles of creatures melt before our supreme majesty like snow in front of a burning sun. Everything is what is in whether we want it. The rest is nothing. If we have put these writings forth, it is because we know for certain that they will bring forth their fruit and will establish the kingdom of our volition in the midst of creatures. The time will come that they will compete for who will be able to know these truths more. Therefore, do not think about it. It is a question of time. I, who know how things will go, I do not stop. Okay, so it's coming. It's coming soon, but how soon and who partakes of its glory depends largely on our response, what we do right now, all of us. So first of all, let's inflame our desire to respond correctly by thinking about it a little bit. Let's see what Jesus said about it. First of all, he calls it almost a return to the original state before the fall. He says to Luisa, there are no ways in the middle. My will was the beginning, and by justice, one who is the beginning must also be the end. Therefore, humanity must be enclosed in my divine volition, to be given back her noble origin, her happiness, and to place the marriage with her Creator in full force once again. So we have to remember that the world, the way it is now, is not normal. As Hugh said today, we are not normal. This is how the world became 6,000 years ago when Adam decided to sin. It's not the original plan, and it's not the way it's going to be much longer either. Now, even before sin, the world was still a world. It wasn't heaven. And even in the era of peace, the reign of the divine will come. It won't be heaven. But it will be a return to the natural order as God designed it, until the true final coming, when we all go to the celestial fatherland. We know this has to happen because God, being perfect goodness, this would be too great a good to leave undone. It would be too great a good, returning to the original glory, for Jesus to just come in his final coming right now and wipe out the world in the depth of misery. Revelation says that the bride, the church, is bedecked with jewels before the wedding. If Jesus were to come right now and end it without this era of peace, it would be like the bridegroom marrying the bride when she is filthy and bruised and bloody. It would not be fitting. So God is first going to purify us, bedeck us with jewels, have us live for a time on earth like that, and then he's going to come. So most of you have already read this brief quote as to how we know it's soon. Jesus says, every 2,000 years I renewed the world. The first 2,000 years I renewed it with the deluge, and the second 2,000 I renewed it with my coming upon earth when I manifested my humanity. Now we are around the third 2,000 years, and there will be a third renewal. And this third renewal, after the earth will be purged and a great part of the current generation destroyed, I will be even more generous with creatures. This is also why I often speak to you about living in my will, which I have not manifested to anyone until now. So the 2000th anniversary of redemption is coming up. Either 2033, if we take it exactly by how we now consider 0 AD, or several years before. Blessed Emmerich and others say that the incarnation actually happened a little before 0 AD, several years before. We don't know specifically when this is going to come, but the point is, we're clearly on the cusp. So we need to be very excited about this. This is the most exciting time in the history of creation. Absolutely. No, not even close. Not only that, we are receiving the most exciting invitation that's ever been offered in the history of creation. Because we are called to be the very ones to usher in this era of peace, each and every one of us. Just by the fact you're here. Just by the fact that you're here, that you know of this, there's so few people know of. and that the earth was to be extremely fertile and rich with abundant plants in such a way that all would have an abundance. Look at the sky, how populated with stars it is. The earth was to be the echo of the sky, crammed with inhabitants, and it was to produce so much as to render everyone rich and happy. Oh, how many great things the kingdom of my divine fiat will do, so much so that all the elements are all in waiting, the sun, the wind, the sea, the earth, and all creation, to deliver from their womb all the goods and effects that they contain. In other words, all the good things we receive now from nature, whether the sun, plants, animals, whatever, it's all a fraction of what it's going to be. It's all a fraction of what God intended it to be. So we're going to see those full effects of natural creation in the era of the divine will. It won't be supernatural, like heaven, that will still be natural, but natural as God intended. We see hints of that even now, all over the place. Sometimes you visit a place in the earth that's so incredibly beautiful, you think you're in heaven already. You can't help but see God. Well, in the era to come, the whole world is going to be like that. Sometimes even now, there's monasteries run perfectly. Everybody in them is in perfect accord with one another and with God. Jesus in the Eucharist is the true King. That's how it's going to be in the era to come for the whole world. Now, it'll still be an earthly pilgrimage away from our celestial fatherland. So we still need to go back home, even during it. But Jesus says what happens in that can't even really be called death. It's more like transition. Here's what he says. Death will no longer have power in the soul. And if it will have power over the body, it will not be death, but transit. The bodies also will not be subject to decomposing, but they will remain composed in their sepulchres, waiting for the day of the resurrection of all. My will have no need to make miracles, because it will preserve people always, healthy, holy, and beautiful, worthy of that beauty that came out of our creative hands in creating the creature. So we'll still have faith in the era of peace. It's not the beatific vision. It's not the direct vision of God's essence without medium, which is heaven. We'll still have faith, but Jesus says it will be a clear and certain faith. He says today faith is like trying to convince someone on an extremely cloudy day that there's a sun. A fool might even deny that. But he says that in the era to come, it will be like convincing someone of the sun on a perfectly clear sunny day. No one could deny it. He says, when my will has its kingdom upon earth and souls live in it, faith will no longer have any shadow, but everything will be clarity and certainty. The light of my volition will bring in the very created things the clear vision of their Creator. Now they are almost like blind people who must believe others that God exists. But when my divine fiat reigns, its light will make them touch the existence of their Creator with their own hands. Jesus also says that the music of the celestial fatherland and the heavenly bodies will echo through the kingdom of the divine fiat. And many philosophers, poets, and writers, astronomers have actually spoken of that, the music of the spheres. Well, we'll hear that in the kingdom of the divine will. So hopefully we all really want this kingdom. I'm a little worried about bacon, though, because I don't think we'll be eating meat anymore. So I'm just really trusting God that he's going to make a new plant grow that is going to taste even better than bacon. So that's a great act of trust. Because we can't just crave it, though. Like we're craving it, it's good. We should always be craving this. What do we do next? We ask for it. Jesus says, therefore you pray, and may your cry be continuous. May the kingdom of your fiat come, and your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. That's what Jesus calls us to do, to cry that continuously. So those are our orders. Well, I know that a divine will comes, but I also know that some people are doubting. And that's fine, I understand. These are incredible things, I won't hold that against you. But let me just ask you this. Why not? Why not pray the greatest petition of the greatest prayer with all your heart and with faith and confidence that it actually can be fulfilled in the clearest possible way? Why not? Why can't we all do that? So, I recommend for the kingdom. Okay, so how do we make sure this cry is heard? We live in the divine will while we First of all, using everything that happens in your life for submission to the divine will, and living in the divine will, everything. Now, there's a distinction in dogmatic theology. We talk about God's permissive will versus his ordained will. Very useful distinction in terms of discerning what you're supposed to do next. It's a useless distinction in looking at what has already happened. In terms of what's already happened, it happened because it was God's will. It doesn't really matter to you whether it was his ordained will or his permissive will. So, if that seems too bold for me to say, we'll listen to a couple quotes from authoritative people. St. Alphonsus Liguori, one of the greatest doctors of the church. He said, "It is certain and of faith," it means dogmatic, "that whatever happens, happens by the will of God." Mother Teresa was once asked, I heard Reverend Royal say this, she was once asked, "Mother, how do I know God's will for me?" And she just paused and smiled, and she said, "See what happens." That was her answer. That will be God's will. So let's see what Father Cassaud, he was a 17th century, I believe, Jesuit priest, a master of the spiritual life. This is what he said. Remember, this is centuries before anybody knew anything about the divine will revelations. "The true philosopher's stone is submission to the will of God, which changes into divine gold all occupations, troubles, and sufferings. Oh my God, how much I long to be a missionary of your holy will, and to teach all men that there is nothing more easy, more attainable, more within reach, and more in the power of everyone than sanctity. Sanctity then consists in willing all that God wills for us. Yes, sanctity of heart is a simple fiat, a conformity of will with the will of God." 1600s. Okay, so there's two heresies that we need to steer clear of: providentialism and quietism. Long story short, they're basically passive, I don't care, indifference to circumstances, thinking you never have to do anything about anything. Certainly true, we need to steer clear of those, but when and how to steer clear of them, well, I should say how, we always steer clear of them, isn't actually as much of a big deal as people make it out to be. A couple examples. Is there discord between you and somebody else? Well, if there's something moral you can do to resolve it, then do it. If not, if you've done nothing wrong, if you are doing nothing wrong, and if there's nothing moral you can do to resolve it, then it's God's will. It's God's will that you submit to that, because he is helping you to be detached from creatures. Jesus tells Elisa that's why he allows discord, to help you to become detached from creatures. Never something we want in and of itself. It's never something we should pursue. But if it happens against and beyond our will, it's God's will for us to submit to and use. How about a sickness or an injury? Well, simple. Take your doctor's advice. Even if it's taking pain medications, do what your doctor says. Whatever's left, whatever suffering is left beyond that, it's God's will for you. Because he needs that. He needs our suffering. He needs our sacrifices. And it's so much better if God takes control of our suffering and sacrifices than if we try to figure out a whole life of penance and mortification on our own. Small everyday things works for also. Driving behind someone too slow, who's going too slow. What do? Say all the swears you can think of. No, of course not. If you can safely and legally pass the person, then do it. If not, it's God's will that you be slowed down so you can pray before you reach your destination. Submitting to God's will in that might just be the one thing that turns us all to saints. Or maybe some of you are making saints by driving too slow. Don't do that, though. Okay, but how about reacting interiorly? No matter what happens, no matter whose will it is or isn't, whatever happens, how we react interiorly is always peace and submission. I should say it must always be peace and submission. Never complaining, never annoyance, never moodiness, never irritation, never resentment. Here's what Jesus tells Luisa about annoyance. "My daughter, one who really loves me, never gets annoyed about anything, but tries to convert all things into love. The weight of any action, be it even an indifferent one, increases according to the dose of love it contains. Therefore I want no annoyance in you, but always peace, because in annoyance and disturbances it is always the love of self that wants to come out to reign, or the enemy to do harm." So peace and submission to all things, and 100%, not 99%. It also means we don't don't ask why. We don't ask why when things happen. St. Paul says, he doesn't say, in all things ask why. He says, in all things give thanks. And that's what Jesus expects of us, who Luisa also, here's what he says. Here's what Jesus says to Luisa about that question. And almost all of the events that occur, preachers keep repeating over and over again. And why, and why, and why. Why this illness? Why this scourge? The explanation of why is not written on earth, but in heaven. And there everyone will read it. Do you know where why was created? In hell. Who was the first one to pronounce it? A demon. There is no evil in the world which does not carry the mark of why. So that's straight from the book of heaven, Jesus to Luisa. So instead of asking why, we need to pay special attention to the crosses in our lives. Padre Pio said that the angels envy us for one thing. Most of you probably heard this. Suffering. Luisa also says that we are all short-sighted in knowing how precious suffering is. She was told that it is the cross and the cross alone which reveals who we really are. Nothing else really says who we are. Jesus said, not even sacraments. Here's what he says about that. My daughter, it really is so. The cross alone is that which makes one know whether he really loves the Lord, but a cross carried with patience and resignation. Because where there is patience and resignation in crosses, there is divine life. Since nature is so reluctant to suffering, if there is patience, it cannot be something natural, but divine. On the other hand, in the other things, even the very sacraments, they cannot give the certainty of the cross. Luisa was visited by a soul in purgatory, who said it takes nothing to know whether you are doing well or badly with God. If you appreciate suffering, you're doing well. If you don't, you're doing badly. So we don't know what soul in purgatory that was, but we'll find out eventually. Hopefully that soul is not still in purgatory. This doesn't mean we have to be ascetic monks. Of course not. We should be doing penance, weekly fasting if possible, regular penance, not all the time, significant but not severe. But most importantly, it's not about the external appearance of the sacrifice at all. It's 100% about the love with which it's undertaken. You could fill a whole book with the amount of times Jesus says that in so many words. Any work, any endeavor, any penance, it's 100% about the love with which we undertake it. So we really need to do that and react with peace and submission to all the causes of providence, places in our lives. So one more point before moving on to the next item. Whatever has happened because it's God's will. We know that much. But remember also that whatever has not happened because it was not God's will that it happened. And we need to offer our fiat to that as well. Because it's so easy to have all these envies, even for holy things. Maybe someone's got the perfect family, the perfect parish, goes on perfect pilgrimages. If we haven't been able to do those things or don't have those things, it's because it wasn't God's will. And if we submit to that lack, it's just as good as doing a severe penance, better than doing some severe penance that you can double. Jesus says about that, my daughter, the more things of which the soul deprives herself down here, the more she will have up in heaven. So the poorer on earth, the richer in heaven. The more she is deprived of taste, pleasures, amusements, trips, strolls on earth, the more of the same she will have in God. So one who leaves the earth takes heaven, be it even the smallest thing. Yet the mortal who thinks of depriving himself of something on earth to have eternal, almost no one. Now, whether it's something you've chosen to deprive yourself of, or whether it's something that providence has deprived you of, same situation. We offer our fiat, we submit, and we be at peace with it, and there's a great sacrifice before God. Okay, next item. Love and purity of intention. So as I said, I had to cut down my talk, and I figured this isn't really important, so I just got rid of this section. No. Just kidding. That is the most important thing. But I know that such beautiful things have been said about this by Father Young and pretty much every speaker here, that I'm going to leave them with the word on this primarily. I just want to say a couple things. We all know that the divine will is the greatest gift. But Jesus also tells Luisa that love and the divine will are on par. He says that love is heat, divine will is light. Love is food, divine will is life. You can't have one without the other. So let me just say a couple quick points. I'm going to skip a few pages here. What should this love look like? Sometimes we forget that we're not, if we spend a lot of time reading Luisa's writings, which we should, we just have to remember we are not bedridden mystics who live in the Eucharist alone expects us to be the light wherever he's put us. So what does Jesus tell Luisa about what our love should look like? He says, "My daughter, the sign to know whether one has true charity is that he loves the poor. If he loves the poor, helps them, supports them, it is because he sees in them the image of God. Therefore, he does not look at roughness, ignorance, rudeness, or misery. Through these miseries, as though through a glass, he sees God, from whom he hopes for everything. And so he loves them, helps them, consoles them, as if he were doing it to God himself." The living divine will is not an invitation to be a navel gazer. We need to get out there and follow our plans, go in spiritual works of mercy. But we have to read something else that the Lord says also. He says, "The charity most acceptable to me is towards those who are closest to me. And those who are closest to me are the purging souls. And how pleasing to my heart one who interests himself with them. The second charity most acceptable to my heart is those who, though living on this earth, are almost like purging souls. They love me, they always do my will, they interest themselves in my things, and so on." He says also that if the sinner were oppressed in the midst of misfortune and one occupied himself, not to convert him, but to relieve and help him materially, the Lord would be more pleased if this were done for those who are in the order of grace. Okay, so both of those quotes are so important to keep in mind, because today we live in a church of extremes on either end. We've got the ultra-liberal social justice parishes who couldn't care less about evangelization. All they want to do is get a bunch of food out there. And we've got other people who all they care about is theology, apologetics, and liturgy, and they'll never lift a finger to help others. So we need both. And we need to do it for the right reasons and in the right ways. God does expect that, especially in this universe. But remember, our Lord says the best form of charity is towards the souls in purgatory. So every day we should be praying and sacrificing for them. Okay, how do we love? How do we receive the strength to do it? It's an act of the will, not a feeling. But how do we receive that strength? We remember that God loves us. That's where the strength comes from. Jesus tells Luisa, "Do you want to know why Adam sinned? Because he forgot that I loved him, and he forgot to love me. This was the first seed of his fall. Had he thought that I loved him very much and that he was obliged to love me, he would never have decided to disobey me. So first love ceased, and then sin began." So we need to remember every day, every moment of every day, that God loves us. And what's the best way to do that? I think the Passion. Meditating on the Passion. Especially, of course, Luisa's Hours of the Passion. If you pick up Luisa's Hours of the Passion, even for a few minutes, and read that prayerfully, you can't leave without being powerfully touched by God's love for us. I don't think there's any close second to that. So we need to read that often, all the time, as much as we can. Jesus tells Luisa that a soul is saved for every word of that we read prayerfully. He says, "If the soul remembers my passion 20, 100, 1,000 times, so many more times will she enjoy its effects. But how few are those who make a treasure of it? All the remedies needed for the whole humanity are in my life and passion. But the creature despises the medicine and does not care. That which saddens me the most is to see religious people who tire themselves out in order to acquire doctrines, speculations, stories, but about my passion, nothing. So many times my passion is banished from churches, from the mouths of priests. Therefore their speech is without light, and the people remain more starved than before." Now, this tragedy has gotten 1,000 times worse since Luisa's times. Today, you go into a lot of Catholic churches, you can't even find a crucifix. Homilies are often self-help pep talks or something. Thinking of the Passion is deemed negative thinking, and there's this New Age heresy called the power of positive thinking. Well, you can't think of anything negative because you might attract that towards you. So it's infiltrated the church, and we need to have nothing to do with it. We need to be signs of contradiction against that. The Passion needs to be before our eyes constantly, and as much as possible, Luisa's Hours of the Passion. Okay, next topic: constant trust, peace, and courage. Jesus really hammers these virtues, much more so than many others. We have to remind ourselves again, though, briefly, that this is not about feelings. Jesus says, "I never look at what the creature feels, because many times feelings can deceive them. I look at her will and what she really wants. That's all I take." So the trust that Jesus wants is an act of the will. Let's skip a few more pages here. Jesus says to Luisa, "I love so much that souls be with me in full trust. Oh, how many times, because of lack of trust, my designs and the greatest sanctities are blocked. This is why I tolerate some defects rather than distrust, because those defects can never be so harmful." He also said, "My daughter, the souls who will shine the most like bright gems in a crown of my divine mercy are the souls who have more trust. Because the more trusting they are, the more they give space for the attributes of my mercy to pour into them all the graces that they want. There is no worry that they may feel ashamed or afraid, rather, they become more brave and take everything in order to love me more." So what does it mean to trust? We can talk for a while about that, but one of the most important parts is to never willingly submit to any fear whatsoever. So how to do that is simple. Say it. Jesus, I trust in you. Say it all day, every day if you have to. The whole universe was created through the Word. And our words are given power. As many times as we say it and try to mean it, God takes us at our word. If you ever feel like you don't trust, don't have a breakdown. Just say it. And God will take you at your word. So, it is that simple. But trust also causes courage. Courage to not be afraid of anything, as I said. One who's striving to live in the divine will really has to have no fear of anything whatsoever. Or should have no fear of anything whatsoever. Now, not many of us are at that level. Someone asks us what we're afraid of, and a whole list of things comes to our mind. Suffering, illness, loss of a loved one, persecution, the devil, financial disaster, Hillary Clinton. Render him even more powerful herself in the sea of as many pleasures and happinesses, as much light and beauty, or as much more good as she has done, be it even in thought. What fear can the soul have in her dying with coming to me, if she is already in me? Now, that's great for those who live in the divine will about everybody else. But here's what Jesus says for the point of death for anyone. So one day the walls fall down, and she can see with her own eyes what they told her before. She sees her God and Father, who loved her with great love. Everything disappears. The only thing that remains present to her is in that room with the fallen walls, eternity. My goodness is such, wanting everyone to be saved, that I allow the falling of these walls when the creatures find themselves between life and death, at the moment which the soul exits the body to enter eternity, so that they may do at least one act of contrition and of love for me, recognizing my adorable will upon them. I can say that I give them 1 hour of truth in order to rescue them. Oh, if all knew the industries of my love that I perform in the last moment of life, so that they may not escape from my more than paternal hands, they would not wait for that moment, but they would love me all their life. So what's there left to fear? Nothing whatsoever. I haven't seen anything from Diary about Hillary Clinton, unfortunately. You can let me know if you come across, but I don't think we have to be afraid of her either. I mean, how much time do I have? I'm in? Oh, no. Well, that's okay, because I have a lot more here that Peter Kreeft said, becoming a saint is becoming about abandoning all of your plans, including your plans on how to become a saint.